Hi. Good morning. Well, last night we saw some more timid window dressing. That's what we saw. A complete lack of accountability and a worsening of accountability from the federal government. And that's why what we want to do is I'm going to have a meeting with Scott Morrison. I've requested a meeting with Scott Morrison to ask him to put forward our legislation on a transparency portal that puts all government spending into the public domain, where we can have 24 million auditors scrutinising every cent our government spends, because it's just not appropriate to continue blowing money as the government is currently doing. This is just another Labor light. It's just spending, spending, spending. We see a complete lack of accountability, and that's the major thing that I've noticed in the last 9 months since I entered the Senate. And it's the first thing I mentioned when I was asked by the media what I'd be focusing on: accountability. The second thing that we're very concerned about is this government makes cost of living pressures even tougher, much, much tougher. We see a Medicare levy increase, but above all, we see an increase in government intrusion into people's lives. And as Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution, it is the problem. And government is suffocating this country. Government is intruding into everything. We saw it in the Murray-Darling Basin last week. We see it everywhere. The federal government is encroaching into people's lives, encroaching into the states and taking over their authority. We have got to increase accountability, and we've got to get rid of so many initiatives in the federal government and send it back to the states. We can move the education department, the health department, the environment department, that's just for a start, back to the states. That would eliminate duplication. We can cut back on the nonsensical climate change spending. We can cut back on the energy prices. The cost of living pressures are enormous, facing mums and dads, families and small businesses right around our country. We're thinking of energy prices, taxation. There's no mention of taxation reform. And in fact, both Bill Shorten and the Prime Minister before the last election said they will not do tax reform. And that is insane. We're getting multinationals ripping us off for hundreds of billions of dollars, and that is not acceptable. Mums and dads have to pay that. That adds to the cost of living pressures. And then we have over-regulation. It's destroying regional economies. It's destroying city economies. And all of those price increases due to government regulation and the quality decreases due to government regulation are just choking this country. We have to face over-regulation and address over-regulation, face and address taxation reform, face and address the high energy prices. We have to get employment moving. The government said, and we agree, welfare is not the solution. Real jobs are the solution. Government can't provide real jobs. It's killing real jobs. We have to get back to basics and enable people to work and enable businesses to employ people.
It's quite a budget reset for the government. What's your reading of the shift from spending to revenue measures?
In what way? It's revenue as in taxation?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've got to cover their hole somehow. You know, and what we're seeing, what's your name? Pat, what we're also seeing is continued waste with the rail initiative, the Inland Rail. It doesn't make sense to put the Inland Rail where they want to put it. It's a cobbled up job, it's a dog's breakfast. What we need to do is move it further forward. And I wonder how many coalition MPs will have properties along that proposed rail track. What we need to do is look inland, because that's where we have lower grades, meaning more efficient transport. We have the track going through the major food bowls. We have the track connecting Toowoomba's Wellcamp Airport. We have an engineered solution going through using tunnels to go right to the Port of Brisbane, the Port of Melbourne. This will save money. The government is not spending its money wisely. It hasn't done its due diligence.
One interpretation of that rail link is that it is a measure to undercut One Nation's support, which are in those regional areas. Is that a concern of yours?
There are so many things the government is doing because we're in the Senate. There are so many things. They're now talking about the regions. They're now talking about, get this, Pat, listening. They're now talking about going out and being with the people. Hello, that's what we're supposed to be doing. So yes, there are initiatives, and I'd say the Inland Rail is one of them. But again, they've screwed it up. This is going to be another NBN. And what we need is a proper engineered solution inland, going from Shepparton right through to Toowoomba.
What measures in the budget does One Nation think they can or they will support, I guess, and particularly in terms of like the changes to schools? and education?
We need to get more of the detail on that before we can make any commitments. Definitely need to get them. There's a lot of material in the budget. The budget papers are so thick, and we need to understand them. We don't make statements off the cuff on things like that. So,
just in terms of the housing affordability package, though, do you agree with Chris Bowen's assessment that it's a bit of a damp squib in terms of achieving what it's trying to achieve?
Well, it's hard to agree with much that Chris Bowen says. He caused a lot of the mess we're now in. It's a fundamental thing, housing, between supply and demand, and they're starting to talk about this. The supply is being constrained by state governments not releasing land, and by blue tape, that's UN regulations, and green tape, needless environmental regulations, over-the-top environmental regulations. That's choking the supply. The demand is being increased by the Reserve Bank of Australia's policies, low interest rates, and just flooding the money with flooding the economy with, what's the name for it? Quantitative easing, quantitative easing. We are engaged in that in this country, and the Reserve Bank tells us we're not, but we are. And that's flooding the place with money, and that is causing an imbalance of supply and demand. It's simple.
In terms of the bank levy, is it a concern of yours that the banks will just shift the costs of that onto consumers?
What do banks normally do? Of course they will. They'll pass it on.
So it still requires a royal commission then into banking?
Definitely. And we'll be, I'm chairing the Senate Select Committee into primary production lending, and we've already had farmers breaking down and doing their submissions, farmers who are so overcome with emotion, reliving what the banks are doing to them, that they're having difficulty making submissions, and we're seeing some submissions coming in. But you know, the farmers cop it hard, Pat, because what's happening is that when we stop live exports, that puts a damper on the farmers' income. Straight away the banks foreclose. If the farmers are having their land taken through property rights issues in Queensland and New South Wales, then that puts a damper on income. The farmers lose their property altogether. The Murray-Darling Basin, that regulation is choking the farmers. Some of them are walking off the land, some of them are being taken by the banks. We have got to protect our farmers. I don't know how they keep going. Their biggest problem is not Mother Nature's variation, which is just natural. Their biggest problem is the government.
Just in terms of the projections in the budget, predicts we'll be back to surplus by 2020-21.
Am I hearing an echo from last year?
Well,
It just moves out every year, doesn't it?
I guess what I'm asking is, just in terms of the projections in the budget, how much faith do you put in those projections themselves? Do you think we'll be back to surplus by 2020-21?
I have no faith in them, none at all. Every year it just gets pushed out further. You know, you've heard of the Laffer curve. The budget projections is a J curve that just moves out every year by another year. And what they get is the headline. The headline is, we're going to return to surplus. But the reality is it's nonsense. I don't have any faith in them at all. And no, none at all. So I'm going to have to go. Thank you very much.